So, a veces nos desconectamos un poco de nuestra niña interior o de las memorias de nuestra niñez. Y it becomes like a little bit of an avoidance, que we reject or abandon our inner child. Y parte del trabajo para mí was to be able to turn towards her y darle ese amor que merecía, ese amor que tanto necesitaba y el entendimiento. And for me to say, I see you and I love you and I'm doing everything in my power now to give you the love and the life and the safety that you deserve.
Hola, amores. Welcome back to the Heal and Manifest podcast. I'm Cynthia Flores. I am your host. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, and podcaster. And this space is really for everyone to break cycles, to embrace our healing journey, and reclaim our power. Today, we have a very special guest. I will introduce her in a minute. But this episode is really going to be about embracing and healing our inner Niña, unlearning survival mode, giving ourselves permission to take up space with joy, embrace our softness, because honestly, we deserve it. We come from generations of mujeres and in our lineage where we're always on the go, we're always grinding, we're always hustling. And it's really time. We are in this time to really start unlearning a lot of that. Yes, take the things that serves us, that supports us in our growth and our healing and our evolution, but also reclaim and unlearn a lot of these patterns that are no longer serving us. And I know that many of us grew up in households and in family dynamics where maybe we were silenced. We had to be always on survival. Our emotions maybe were dismissed, and we learned really to be strong, to be super hyper independent, which is, there's nothing wrong with being independent and doing your own thing, but sometimes that leads to disconnect from ourselves. And healing really means to break certain cycles and patterns, and really coming back home to us and nurturing our little inner child, our little Niña that needs love, that needs attention, that needs care. And we need to start giving ourselves permission to just be, to show up. So I guess my question to all of our listeners is, when was the last time you showed love to your inner Niña? Today, I have a special guest. Her name is Kim Guerra. I'm sure you probably know her. I'm so excited to have you here, Kim. She is a writer, a poet, creative force behind Badass Bonita, a movement that really empowers mujeres to own their strength, their power, honor their roots. And throughout her powerful storytelling and community work that she's doing, Kim really helps us remember who we are outside of our experiences, the adversity that we have experienced, and really help us embrace our softness, our fire, our niña, our guerreras, and the mujer that we are. Well, Kim, thank you so much for being here. I am so honored, and I've followed your work since the moment when you started writing, and I was just like, wow, this resonates so much. And this has been years, and I've seen your transition and your journey and how much you've evolved. And I know that you recently came out with your book, Badass Bonita, and I want to learn a little bit more about that. Your book is Badass Bonita: Break the Silence, Become a Revolution, Unearth Your Inner Guerrera. What inspired you to write this book?
Yes, thank you. And I think it was a need where it all started kind of when I was in grad school, and I kept looking for research and articles and books written for and by Latinas that talked about our specific traumas and culture and family dynamics. Y no lo encontraba. And I remember I would get super frustrated because we needed that. And when I was doing research, and also for my own healing journey, era puros libros written by white people for white people. Y muchas cosas a veces no me aplicaban, or they caused more harm. And then I remember thinking back in the day, I was like, oh, like maybe I'm gonna, I have to write it myself. Y at that time, no me lo creí en verdad, pero I think that's where the seed was planted. And then throughout my journey, I started to como que gather the things that helped me de diferentes libros, diferentes prácticas, diferentes personas. Y poco a poco fui como coleccionando estas herramientas, procesos, medicina que a mí me había ayudado. And then that's like, okay, when I was in a space where I was more ready, then I was like, okay, maybe now I can use these and put them in a book. Hopefully it helps other people in the way that it helped me.
I love that. And we do need representation in these books, right? We often go to grad school or we, go through our education system and we don't see our experiences being reflected, being represented. And sometimes that does lead to a lack of sense of belonging or not feeling good enough, right? Not feeling like there are other people out there with similar experiences. So sometimes that instills or we internalize a lot of shame, like there's something wrong with me, or why are people not looking like me? Why are these experiences so unique to me and nobody out there in this world has these experiences? So I definitely resonate with that because this has also been part of my journey too, and finding out like we do belong, and reframing that experience, and that there are people out here who are doing this work, this amazing work, like you are. And I'm really glad that this book is out here and like really supporting others in their healing journey and reclaiming their power as well. um, I guess, since the topic that we're talking about is about healing our inner Niña, healing these our childhood wounds, right? Sometimes, um, what has been your journey when it comes to embracing and healing your inner child and your inner Niña?
It's been a very long and beautiful journey. And como I remember when I first started, it was really scary, very vulnerable, porque es que si nuestra niña interior ha sufrido mucho, a veces we're afraid to revisit that story or those memories or that trauma. So a veces nos desconectamos un poco de nuestra niña interior o de las memorias de nuestra niñez. Y it becomes like a little bit of an avoidance que we reject or abandon our inner child. Y parte del trabajo para mí was to be able to turn towards her y darle ese amor que merecía, ese amor que tanto necesitaba y el entendimiento. And for me to say, I see you and I love you and I'm doing everything in my power now to give you the love and the life and the safety that you deserve. Entonces ha sido un proceso muy bello, de mucha intención, de mucha profundidad. That, to this day, I still work with my therapist, and there's things that with my inner child that come out. And she's like, okay, vamos a trabajarlo. Está saliendo la niña interior, está saliendo también la adolescente en ti que está un poco así. Entonces, ha sido, como decía, like a lifelong journey that I'm committed to.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you know what? In doing this work as a therapist myself, I know that sometimes clients come to me and they're like, "Well, this is what's happening. These are the things that triggered me, and this reminded me of when my mom, rejected me or abandoned, or I felt the sense of abandonment." These are all childhood wounds, right? That come up, that can trigger by how we navigate certain relationships. We're navigating work, we're navigating life, we're navigating stressors, even as adults. And I guess I'm wondering for you, sometimes clients are like, okay, well, is this my inner child? Is this some work that I need to be doing? I'm curious for you, what experience or what triggered you to say, okay, I really need to tap into my inner child and my inner Niña. I need to start doing like inner child healing work.
Ooh, I think it was when you realize like that you're bleeding from the same wounds y repeating certain cycles that que tal vez sometimes like para mí decía, there has to be something deeper, because I'm trying, I would be like, I'm trying the self-care, I'm trying therapy, talk therapy, and I'm trying this, pero like there was something deeper, que cuando estaba en mi tristeza o estaba en mi dolor, era algo muy profundo that always kind of led me back to my childhood and always led me back to that inner Niña, and I didn't know how to connect that because it was so scary and so painful. Y entonces era como que sí, yo siempre estaba en la búsqueda. I was like seeking, how do I heal this deep pain? How do I heal like this deep como emptiness that que algo me hace falta? And it wasn't until I started to do this inner child work that I was able to get to the root of a lot of my wounds and a lot of the pain that I had been carrying for so long. Y entonces yo recomiendo a las personas que sí, que a lot of times like we get clients that are like, oh, como it becomes like such a disconnect. But once you start doing inner child work, you're able to say, that's your inner Niña. And, this is inner child work that needs to be done. Y sí, es cuando sientes esta profundidad, like there has to be something else because we have to get to the root. Y es eso.
Yes. Yeah, getting to that root, those childhood experiences, right? The childhood adversities. What do you think are some of the biggest wounds that us as mujeres, cargamos about our childhood? If you were to name a few.
Claro, I think there's a deep, deep wound in many, many mujeres, many Latinas, especially like the mother wound. Pero that wound is mostly, and almost all our wounds, I think, can trace back to machismo and the internalized machismo too that has been passed down from generation to generation, de mujer a mujer, que viene esta herida de calladita te ves más bonita, that we were born and raised to sacrifice ourselves and serve others and put ourselves last and be submissive and not speak up and not believe that we're worthy. Or sometimes like we're raised to believe that we're only going to be worthy if we have the validation of a good man. And si ya tienes un buen hombre, una buena familia, entonces ahí sí te damos la validación y aceptación. And it's all rooted and centered around us serving and being validated by men, whether it's by our looks, our worthiness, our body, how well we serve. So that's one of the deepest, deepest wounds where reclaiming that and choosing to love yourself brings medicine into that wound, because you're choosing to say, I am worthy. I am choosing to love myself. My voice is important and I am worthy of living the life that I want and I deserve. Y eso es algo muy revolucionario.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yes, that centering men, that's a big wound, right? I think that we have carried, from through generations, through our abuelas, bisabuelas, it's like seeking that external validation, that external love, that external reassurance when, yeah, it's important to have connections, it's important to have supportive, loving relationships, and yet how do we also give that to ourselves? Right. And sometimes that turns into this, when we're centering others, that leads to abandoning ourselves, right? The self-abandonment. And yes, the abandonment wound, la herida del abandono, that is pretty real, but also the self-abandonment, right? The how we abandon ourselves to meet other people's needs, to people please, to prioritize others. And that's a big one,
Claro, es también como our cultura raises us almost to be codependent, and codependent is something that we continuously abandon ourselves in order to get the validation and for others to not abandon us. But when we're seeking, when we center others and que va a decir la gente, and pleasing them and serving and saying yes to everybody but yourself, it leads to a constant self-sacrifice, self-silencing, self-abandonment, self-resentment, because then you're always just tired and burnt out and upset. You feel trapped in your own life.
Of course. That's a big one, that codependency. And yes, going back to, as human beings, as a community, we are a collective community, right? So we do thrive in community, but then there's a difference, right? It's like, yes, collectively supporting each other, but not to the point that you put everyone else and everybody else is your world, or another person or your partner is your world. It's like you have to also think about yourself, so it's really about a balance there. I did want to share that there's also other wounds, the rejection, la herida del rechazo, that is also very subjective based on our own personal experiences. Maybe, and I think it comes back to our parents, right? Our attachments are with our primary caregivers, the people that are supposed to give us love and meet our needs. Sometimes it could be as simple as like, oh, they didn't carry me when I was crying and I just needed to be co-regulated, that can feel very much like rejection, or things that our parents have said unintentionally, subconsciously. And that, children are very, very sensitive, so we internalize a lot of these messages because we're very intuitive, sensitive, little humans. And that's also something that I've heard a lot. The silencing is a big one, like the wound of being silenced, being submissive, right? To be chosen, the injustice, that's another wound. Experiencing injustice, experiencing violence, and not necessarily like physical violence, but violence against, like, just living in a patriarchal society that puts women as second class citizens. I mean, that's something that we do see and we continue to see, even though we still have rights, we still like aiming towards equality and basic human rights. There's still that level of injustice that we still carry, even intergenerationally, right?
Claro, y es eso como if we were born into a society, a culture, a family system in which these machista values and these wounds exist because just like we carry them, our mommies carry them, and our grandmothers carry them, and our tias and our great grandmothers carried and lived through very similar wounds. And
Mm.
we are born into a society, yes, that says that women need to be quiet, women need to serve, women need to do this, and then we listen and we hear that so much that we internalize it and we believe it, and then we also in turn begin to see ourselves and other women through these eyes of machismo, in which
Mm-hmm.
women start
Mm-hmm.
competing with other women, or women raise their daughters to also be quiet. Like the first person that
Mm-hmm.
told me "Cállate, te ves más bonita" was my mom, because her mom told her that. And it's an act of like, okay, we're also trying to protect you, but it's also simply what they were told. Y entonces,
Mm.
nosotros ahora que estamos haciendo ese trabajo, it part of it is reclaiming, but also acknowledging the pain that comes from that, acknowledging the pain, the violence that has come through silencing, and that it
Mm-hmm.
really is one. It's Galleta tres más bonita is a lie, but two, we have to see it as also like a life or death issue, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, because women were taught to be quiet and to be small and to shrink and to be submissive, we also have kind of been taught to tolerate abuse or mistreatment, or not speak up when abuse is happening, when violence is happening. And we are taught to stay and be quiet and to protect men and to protect our abusers, to protect our oppressors. We saw our mommies protecting our abusers and oppressors. They protected their own abusers and oppressors. Y eso es algo
Yeah.
que, como que si lo vemos así, es algo muy
Mm-hmm.
grave. Es una herida muy
Yeah.
profunda that extends across generations, but it's also
Yeah.
impacts how you see yourself and how you show up in this world.
100%. And, this just reminded me of how the perpetuation of silence, it does perpetuate violence. It perpetuates the perpetrator. It made me think. I just finished watching Netflix Case on Gabby Petito. I don't know if you saw it, but it just reminded me so much. Like, wow, in that instance when they were, someone called the police and they're like, "Oh, he was slapping her," and then the police stopped them, and he had a bunch of scratches, and like she was the one being questioned, when at the end of the day that was reactive abuse. And we know that in the domestic violence, or the cycle violence, is it's like the reactive abuse is really just reacting to the violence already being perpetrated by the perpetrator. So it can seem as like either physically defending themselves, verbally, lashing out, etc. But we know that that is reactive abuse, right? And it came to the point where she was unalived, and nobody, I mean, unfortunately, the police system, there's a lot that they need to do to train people with domestic violence, to further assess, to make sure they're asking the right questions, because it leads to femicides, it leads to violence, it leads to unaliving. And we've seen that even in that, towards the end of that series, they were talking about, well, you know they're not really showing other cases, they're not showing people of color, black and brown communities, because this happens every day. This is happening every day. And yeah, we're seeing a white woman who maybe is brought up to the attention because there's more media coverage, there's more attention, and people want to do more. I think that violence is violence regardless of your color, regardless of your gender, because I do think that men also experience violence, and there's nobody, like nadie se escapa de eso, so it made me think a lot about that cycle of violence and how it's perpetrated in our culture. And we need to have more education. We need to provide more education on that, and people need to ask the right questions and you know educate themselves on that.
Y como que estás diciendo, es un ciclo. It's a cycle of power and abuse. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that that is broken is by us speaking up without shame, because shame and silence are what makes
Yeah.
abuse happen. Or I'm going to
Thrive.
repeat, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to reframe that, because it's not what makes it happen, but it's what, como it breeds the secrecy
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
what we're born, this silence that we're born into, and this machismo that we're born into, como teaches us to aguantar instead of hablar, instead of protegernos a nosotras
Mm-hmm.
mismas y a otras personas que están sufriendo poder, están sufriendo el abuso.
Yeah.
Entonces, como tú estabas diciendo, es algo que necesitamos educarnos más
Mm-hmm.
and educate
Mm-hmm.
one another, but also yo creo que lo que más necesitamos como personas que estamos sanando es como la
Mm.
compasión y el espacio para sanar. That oftentimes with like if we've encountered a lot of abuse, if we've encountered a lot of trauma, and we're used to silencing ourselves, and we're sometimes like we feel guilty for speaking up, or we
Mm-hmm.
feel guilty for holding people accountable and for sharing our truth and for breaking the silence. And many times we start to shame ourselves, and sometimes we start to then oppress our own self because we feel like we're doing something wrong. Entonces,
Mm-hmm.
parte del trabajo, como que yo hago mucho con mis clientas y con las mujeres que trabajo, es apapacharse y crear un espacio donde como there is no shame here, and that you deserve
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
all the cariño, all the compassion, for whatever ways you showed up for yourself today and for your healing journey.
I love that. And you're right. Shame is really, it's what breeds, but also when we break the silence, we're breaking shame, because even though like we're sometimes people are victims of abuse and violence, and this goes back to childhood wounds, and in healing our inner child, that part of that is like we have to break that cycle of shame
Sí.
and the cycle of guilt. Yeah. And I guess for you, I'm wondering, how do you do this work? I know that I've seen workshops that you're providing. How are you like helping others heal? and break the cycle of silence, of shame, guilt, but also reconnect to their inner niñas.
I think part of the work is como I have to start doing it myself y ya después como que sí, invitar a otras personas que how I see it is like if I have these wounds and I have these tools and this medicine, it may help you too. Y entonces como que sí, a través de workshops, whether I also take individual clients, have the Mujer Mariposa coaching program that has been super transformative for me and for the women that I work with because it's like a 6-week cohort, and each week we focus on a different topic. And as I was writing the book, I was also doing this cohort, and it helped me kind of get a sense of how I wanted people to feel reading the book. Is I wanted you to feel like you're healing alongside other mujeres and that you're doing similar work and putting medicine on similar wounds. And that's what the Mujer Mariposa program feels like, where you're like, okay, week 1, we're showing up to do inner niña work. So all our inner niñas show up and are present with us too, y nos podemos acompañar en ese camino. Week 2, we do intergenerational healing. Then we start to study who we are, our identity. We learn about boundaries, relationship patterns, attachment styles. Then we think about and visualize, how do I want to become? And who is a woman that I'm seeking to become, the most badass, liberated version of myself. And it's this beautiful como acompañamiento, as you're showing up for yourself, but then you're also building beautiful bonds with other women. Que necesitamos, like we need one another. And I think we need one another to go through the metamorphosis process, to give ourselves wings, to believe in ourselves, to also let other women witness you in your vulnerability, but also in your power, and to hold one another. And that, I think, is a big part too in breaking shame and breaking the silence, creating a space where you have the intention of healing and protecting one another and empowering one another. Porque yo siempre les digo a las mujeres, many times we carry shame that never belonged to us, that it belonged to the people that did the abusing and the oppressor. Entonces, shame makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, or that you did something wrong, so you just kind of receive it, te aguantas, and it como que it breathes inside of you, versus like saying, no, this shame does not belong to me. The shame belongs to the abuser who did the abusing and the oppressor who did the harm. It is not mine. I have nothing to be ashamed of. And sometimes it takes other women to remind you that.
I love that. I love the collective healing, because that's what we need. That's what we need right now. And that's especially now, currently, with this political climate, and knowing that there's a lot of systemic changes that are happening that are, yes, partly out of our control, like it's like, how do we gather together in community to heal, to break cycles, to break these cycles of shame and guilt and the cycle of silence, So I guess I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, how the current political climate, systemic issues impact our ability to show up, to take up space?
Claro, it's what I've been, and también this has shown up with all my clients every day. Y es algo que sí, como que it brings up also a lot of inner child wounds, a lot of childhood wounds or old wounds, because here we have, not only are we reliving the trauma of maybe being first generation, of having undocumented parents or family members, or being undocumented ourselves, it also perpetuates the cycle. Like, we're living a cycle of power and abuse in the current system in charge, where there is a very a very violent person in charge, making harmful decisions, hateful decisions that make us feel powerless, that make us feel small, that make us feel alone and isolated. So of course it's going to be hard to show up when there's so much that is constantly changing, and there's a leader that is making harmful decisions and hurtful decisions for us and for our community. Entonces, ahorita se siente que sí, todo es un desmadre afuera. Like, around us, things are constantly changing, and we don't know what's coming next. So it activates this survival trauma mode where you're like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know I don't have any stability right now. I don't even know how to plan because everything is changing so fast and I don't know how to show up or who to trust y todo eso. Y entonces parte de este proceso que nos está invitando, sí, is like how much we need our community right now to create a sense of safety and protection, to create a sense of como un respiro y un refugio, pero también las dos palabras que están surgiendo una y otra vez es identidad, our identity, who we are as individuals and as a people, and our purpose, because we all have a purpose in this time. Que sea what message you're here to bring, who you're meant to hold, how you're going to show up. If you're going to create art, create it. If you need to sing your songs, sing them louder. If you need to, like love your children, love them more, love them tighter, love them harder. Y eso nos está como que también como activando de un lugar más profundo y con más intención. So it's like,
I love that.
Who am I and how am I going to show up? And who am I going to surround myself with to protect my internal sense of peace and internal sense of purpose? Para no ser un desmadre afuera y adentro. To not let the desmadre in as much as possible.
No, I love that. And you know what? That leads me to my next question, right? It's like you talk about purpose, you talk about how important it is to remind ourselves that we're here to serve, to be of service to our community, to have a purpose, to speak our truth, to take up space, and also to reclaim our joy, right? To reclaim our power by reclaiming our joy, reclaiming our softness, right? Rather than just being on that survival and focusing so much on the things that are out of our control. That shit's always, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be out of our control. But what can we do to regain that sense of control and power with the things that are important for us? And I guess that's my question. How do we reclaim our joy, our softness?
I think it's from a sense of intention, connection and attunement to yourself. You have to learn to listen to yourself, de escucharte y de conocerte y de amarte. Because when you love yourself, and when I mean love yourself, it's like all of you and the deepest parts of you, and you love yourself enough to accept and celebrate who you are right now, but to also change and heal what needs to change and heal, because you love yourself enough to not stay the same. You love yourself enough to not stay bleeding. You love yourself enough to not stay in the darkness. That you say you deserve to heal. You are worthy of peace. You are worthy of joy. You are worthy of todas las cosas bonitas, todo el amor bonito, lo mereces y te lo voy a dar. And to figuring out what that means and what that looks like for you, because it looks different for every person. Your joy is different than my joy. They're both beautiful and valid, but they're different. Entonces, para mí, mi trabajo es investigar y conocer qué me hace, qué me da esa alegría, qué me da ese propósito, qué me da ese valor a mí. What are the things that make me beautiful? And I'm going to choose to find them, and I'm going to choose to hold on to them. I'm going to choose to own them and shine. Y eso también es lo que necesitamos ahorita. Like, we need people who are choosing to heal and love and shine and speak and cry and feel and laugh and be, despite all the shit that's happening. Eso es lo que nos va a sacar adelante.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. What is last message that you would give to anyone who is feeling stuck in their healing journey, who's having a difficult time finding hope, who's maybe finding themselves in a very deep place, a deep obscure hole? What is that one message that you have for them?
To love yourself there. To sit with yourself in that darkness, and to know that all the feelings that you have are valid y that they won't last forever. Como que eso me ayuda a mí. The storm is not going to last forever, and the darkness is not your home. The silence is not your home. And that we have suffered enough, and that we are worthy of building a home in the light, of resting, and of having peace and knowing joy. And so I remember when I was in my darkest times, me sentía muy solita, and I felt that it was going to last forever. And then one of the things that helped me, instead of like resisting it, because I would just be like, como que no me gustaba sentirme así, pero then no me dejaba sentirme así, and then it would make me feel more depressed or more heavy, more hopeless. I learned to sit with myself and give myself love, porque you have so many reasons to feel this sadness. You have so many reasons to feel this grief. You have so many reasons to feel this rage for all the things that are happening, for all the injustices that are happening, for so much suffering that is happening. So you have it's valid, and if you need to feel it, feel it. And you're also worthy of feeling and living the beauty that's in this world that also belongs to you. And poco a poquito, you get to walk towards that light when you're ready. Build a bridge between the dark and the light.
I love that, Kim. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for sharing your medicina, your wisdom, your knowledge. I admire all of your work, and I'm sure you're touching other people's hearts and lives, and you're making a difference. And a lot of us in this healing world, and a lot of us healers are, I do believe in the wounded healer. It's like we're here because we're doing this work because we've experienced some dark shit, and we're here to provide that light, to remind others of their light, to remind others of their power, and how beautiful they are, and to honor all of these different parts, all of these disowned parts, all of their lights, their darkness. So I appreciate you in this conversation, Kim. Where can people find you?
Gracias, and I appreciate you too. Thank you for this work, por tus palabras, por tu luz, medicina, por tu magia. Keep doing it. People can find me on Instagram, Badass Ex Bonita. We also have a community, Queer Girl Around the World, for queer mujeres and non-binary folks, and Casita Queer, which is an artist residency we just opened up here in Oaxaca for queer artists and queer people that want a place to create, heal, and connect. So you can find me, and again, if you are interested in Mujer Mariposa, whether it's an online cohort, we also have Mujer Mariposa retreats. If you're seeking a therapist or a group of mujeres who are doing this work, please reach out. Don't hesitate.
Awesome. Gracias, gracias, gracias. And thank you everyone who joined, who tuned in. If this resonated, share it with your loved one. And don't forget to like, subscribe, put a comment in there, and support this work that we are all doing. Y nos vemos en el próximo episodio. Adiós.